we had, I always wanted to be a doctor. I don't know how many people actually wanted to be engineers as young kids. But yeah, I actually enjoyed tech and everything else quite a lot. But it kept changing, obviously. Like I think for most kids. Then at a slightly later stage in my life, I wanted to be a pilot. Obviously, a fighter pilot, but that didn't happen. And then I realized that okay, I don't want to die that young, so maybe something else. And then I was fascinated by industrialists, not any businessman, but just industrialists. I had this punchline I used to tell everyone, but I won't say it over here. But I just wanted to be involved in, like, I just wanted to build something really big from a manufacturing perspective, right, and diverse in that sense. And then I realized my dad comes from a farming background, and it's very different world out there. But also the charm of industrialists kind of went away. And the one thing that finally led to is I think if you look at what we are looking at from a final stages, like just before I started my career, last 3-4 years of my engineering, the one thing I kept telling people was I will end up being anything but a software engineer. Right? That's one thing I'm not going to do. And I was very, very fixed on that. Right? I'm not a software engineer because I was doing engineering. Right? That was the option that we had. And like, I'm not going to be a techie. I'm not going to be doing this and all. So that kind of became one of the things, because the reason it became a mistake is because it kind of closed down some options for me. Right? When I was doing my engineering, I had a lot of time to do some really interesting things on the tech side, which I never did because it ended up being one of the. I always thought I'm not going to be in tech, and I'm definitely not a software engineer in that sense. 16, 17, 18 years later, part of a tech company. So in that sense, that's one of the things that I learned very early on, saying that never say never. You never really know what happens, and never say never more from the perspective of how it would close down a few doors for you. I was lucky enough not to miss ThoughtWorks as a company. It was actually one of the best parts of my initial stages of my career, and I think even if you look at the overall thing, the kind of experience that I got there, the learnings, the people I met, the projects that I got to work on, everything came down to, I think overall I was never supposed to be there. I was never supposed to attend the interview. I was never supposed to, join the company. It was just that I was, preparing for CAT, and I was like, this was a good, exam to give. And then when I went to the interview stage, I was like, wait, just, it was a cricket match, and I wasn't watching cricket, so I was like, let me just go there. And it just so happened that on that particular day I didn't make a mistake, but had I not done that, then this would be very different, right? At least I would not be here. So I think keeping your options open is very important. It's okay to keep changing what you want to do, but never shut down any option, right? The one thing that I actually wanted to do was shut down IT as a actual career in my life, and so that became one of the. That is a mistake in some sense, but I also managed to avoid major repercussions of that. So that was the first one. For everything in life, there's a stage of inertia, right? It's one of the most difficult things to get past. I think I've always had an entrepreneurial, side of me, but I didn't have, I think, a certain amount of courage or confidence to just go ahead and do it. I still remember the first thing I did when I came out of school, not college, was actually came up with an idea of t-shirts which are printed and crowdsourcing the design for it. And this was like, I'm talking about 20 years ago, before Myntra was there and everything else. And I actually just didn't come up with the idea. It was, I spoke to t-shirt companies, I spoke to printing presses, I spoke to a few retailers, created an entire supply chain, and then figured out a basic business model. I didn't know much about business then, but I thought, if you make 20 rupees per t-shirt or 30 rupees per t-shirt, if you sell 1,000 t-shirts a month, then we're the richest people in the world, right? So it was like that. But the first 3 people that I took it to, they were my closest friends, were laughing at me, and they were like, are you kidding me? What's wrong with you? We should finish your college, engineering, and a bunch of things. And I just kind of did not go past that. I think that inertia kind of continued staying with me for a significantly long period of time. And I think a big part of it was because personally I was waiting for people that I trusted to start at the same time as I did. And that cumulative need to, or the need to start cumulatively is one of the biggest inertias that I had to personally get through. And I'm fairly certain it's something similar for Mitesh, Madhu, and Naveen as well. And I think while I waited also for too long. So this was, my first story was in the 10th standard, and the last story before which I actually took the plunge was when I came back from US, and there was this company over there called Zipcar. And very interesting business model, simple. It's called a Zoomcast over here. Zoomcast picked up the UI designs from Zipcar. They didn't even bother changing it, right? They just changed the name. It was such a simple business model. Again, did the whole thing, pitched it to a couple of people I knew, and nobody was ready to do it. And then, I think that is, if you think about this number of possible opportunities that could have created, that's something that I missed. And I definitely think that's one of the bigger mistakes that I've done. I think it's very important to get out of your comfort zone in terms of anything that you want. And it doesn't have to be a new company, right? Even if it's it doesn't even have to be a new job. It could be something else that you're doing. But I think getting out of the comfort zone is something that's very important, and that probably it took a little longer than it should have, a lot longer. The lessons I learned from this. So I don't know if I spoke about lessons last time. I was thinking, while I talk about mistakes, I also talk about what lessons I got from them. Personally, one of the things is I realized the most important thing in anything is just starting it. Like literally, I even have it on my phone. It's the old phone I have it. Starting something is half the job done. After is just staying at it. But it's one of the most important and the most difficult things that you can do. So I think the last 5 years I've focused on starting something, because following through, you either get another team to do it, or you find other people who are really good at it. But you also need to ensure that starting is happening. Starting new things, starting things that are right for the company, for you, and for the rest of whatever you want. The other lesson I've learned is one of the reasons why it wasn't starting is people are not going to take the risk with you always, right? So what we realized, I think as a group and also as individuals is, personally I've definitely seen a difference. The moment I quit my job and I said, I'm doing this, now do you guys want to join? It was a very different response. It was much more easier for people to join you because you're already in the journey, and you have to put your own thing. So even yesterday, one of my very good friends called me to ask. He started a startup and he asked me when is the right time to quit. And for me, the answer was very simple: yesterday, right? If you want to do something, you have to quit and you have to be fully dedicated to it. So I think getting yourself to be fully engaged in whatever you're doing. Again, I'm not talking about it purely from the startup perspective. Anything that you want to do, I think that would be much more easier to convince people. If you're walking the path, people will have some reason to believe in you. Otherwise, if you're just talking the talk, everyone has a $10 billion idea a day. So there's really no value in that. And one lesson that I learned is, so this is very interesting. For about 6-7 years of my life in corporate, I thought, oh man, I should have started something. And the next 3-4 years was like, shit, maybe it's too late. It's too late, right? I mean, it's like, what are you going to do now? You're getting into 30s. That was a long time back. And then I realized that actually it's never too late to start anything, because there are advantages of starting early, but there are also a lot of advantages of starting late. I mean, the kind of network that we had as 4 founders was incredibly useful when we started this, right? So it's actually never too late to even start learning something. I guess I picked up learning guitar about a year back and semi-decent at it right now. So I think in general, that's another thing that would actually lead to inertia, saying that maybe it's too late, maybe it's not the right time or something. So I realized that there's actually never something called too late. I was very uncomfortable speaking about what work I've done, things like that. So I was always idealistic in that sense that if I do proper work and if I'm doing my stuff, then the work speaks for itself. While at some theoretical level it is true, and in some cases it also is one of the best ways to shut down your competition, or not competition, shut down people who are challenging you or speaking ill about you. There still is a certain amount of reality into what goes into creating a public perception, or at least letting people know about what you're talking about. But my reviews in ThoughtWorks, one of the worst out of my 11 years, came on a project where I personally believe that I did some of the best work. And I spent a lot of time. I put my personal life on hold to dedicate my life to that project. And personally, outside of the hard work, I think the work that I did itself, I was very proud of it. And I got the worst review ever. And this was also from it wasn't like there was any personal angle to it because the entire team was very close to me, and even the all the way from the client team to individual guys were all very good friends of mine. And it came as a shock. I'm like, what? Like when I heard this, I was like, what? Are we talking the same project? And then when I got down to it, I realized that it came down to one thing. It came down to what my role was supposed to be doing as a public perception, right? I was a lead analyst in that, and that was a project with about 11 analysts outside of me. So it was a massive project, very complicated, and the team believed that as an analyst, I was also supposed to be doing X, Y, Z things, right? The problem was I did not bother to actually, talk about what I was doing, what I was supposed to be doing, and everything else. There were some issues because of which a significant part of the client management team was not there, and I was the only person who could actually travel to the client location. So I was doing 3 other roles, one of which was business analysis. But the people who were judging me were only judging me for this role, not the other roles. And it was a simple matter of communicating and making sure that we're all on the same page with respect to expectations and all that. So one of the tougher lessons I learned, because it took me a long time to get past that thing. That review did not go away. That review stuck because everybody was like, no. They refused to budge. It's also been my longest review meeting. I'm not kidding over this. You can check this. It was a 8 to 9 hour review call. That's how long it took, because it was just poles apart. That's what I thought I did and what the rest of the team thought I did. So in that sense, it was really bad because the expectations were just completely an orthogonal site. And then I think one of the things was even the work that I picked up was just work I thought was obvious, right? Yeah, koi nahi kar raha hai, so nobody's doing it, so let me just pick it up. I thought that was enough. That should have been enough. The intent and the fact that I'm actually doing a good job at it. No, it wasn't enough. It was very important to set the expectations right from the very beginning. So the lessons learned. I mean, what it meant is, it was a big jolt for me because it was very disappointing. It kind of shattered my confidence to a certain extent, and it took a long time to recover from that. But it also gave me some of the best life lessons or professional lessons at least. One of that is, I was of the belief that you should not beat your own drums. Is that the right term? Yes, beat your own drums. Yeah. Don't. Beating your own drums. Beat your own drums is actually talk about what you have done and how great you have done a job, how good you are at something like that. And that changed because to a certain extent, what they're trying to say is don't be ridiculous when you're doing it, but you have to tell people what you're doing. You have to make sure that they understand what you're doing, see this strong expectation, see if they're expecting something else from you and everything else. I think in a culture like ours where we encourage people to be very open about being, or we give critical feedback, that feedback is going to come to you. So if you don't set the expectations right, it's just going to hurt you at some level. So one of the things I realized was something like this would have been very easily avoided if I just set some expectations or clarify what I'm doing as a role with the rest of the team. And it's always good to start with that. It's always good, whether you're starting a new role, whether you're starting a new project, it's always good to just not assume things and say that, okay, this is what I think I should do. What do you think I should do? Is it on the same page? If you're on the same page, then can we put it on a piece of paper or an email? That's another thing. Actually, I should put that as one of the mistakes. Some of the things that are not documented has come back and bitten me. Really bad. So document everything.
Even now.
Yeah, even now it's ridiculous, right? Sometimes some of the clients, after the call, say, I didn't say that. You're like, we just spoke about it. And sometimes it's also true, right? We might have understood wrongly. So, minutes of the meeting is very, very important. Anyway, I digress. In terms of trying to avoid it, one thing I've learned is communication is king. And always lean on the side of over communication. We're actually working with some really big business guys, people who are at the CTO level and everything else. And so, at some level, you just get into a shell and you say, let me just sit back and observe or something. So what I did was I thought, I thought, if I speak something, it would be like preaching to the choir, right? Like, just basically like, they know everything else and you have nothing more to add. I was in that mode for quite some time, actually. A good 1 or 2 years, I, let go of, voicing my opinion. Sometimes I would be like, yeah, I had this really important point, nobody brought up that point, but maybe they didn't bring it up because it wasn't that important. So I was kind of doubting myself. This specifically happened more internally than externally, but the impact was also felt externally. For example, in an internal meeting, I was sit quietly because there were a lot of really smart people around. Externally, it would be like, oh man, these guys know that business, what am I going to add to them? So that's kind of what ended up happening because of that is, I think I lost a good 2-3 years of my time where I could have built my credibility in a place like Providence. And the assumption was always that my point of view was not important enough. And that I think is a mistake not just from my side, and I think it's a mistake in a lot of people's life where you tend to stay back and sit quietly. Doesn't mean that you have to air your opinion in every meeting. Doesn't mean that you just speak for the heck of it. There were a lot of those people as well. I think this is specifically taught in MBA schools, right? Be the last person to speak, summarize everything, because every MBA student wanted to summarize, and there'd be 2 or 3 summaries, right? So it's really annoying in that sense. We engineers are not like that. And also one of the assumptions that I made because of which I kept quiet was I assumed if somebody is holding a CXO role or somebody is heading something, then they must be good at it, right? I mean, people are rational creatures. That's actually one of the biggest mistakes. People are not rational creatures. They are anything but rational. So don't go by the titles. Don't let titles intimidate you. A lot of times, either the title is exaggerating something or people have gone there in the wrong sense, right? So you might be in a very good position to actually contribute, positively to that. So, but playing dumb cost me quite badly. There is one place where I tell the analysts to play dumb, which is while making assumptions. Right? Don't make assumptions. Just ask the questions. That's a good place to play dumb. But otherwise, when you're in a conference and when you're talking to people, I think it's always good to voice out your opinion, specifically if you believe that it's right. Right? I heard this in a movie recently, and I think it was one of the Spider-Man movies. So it is possible that in the topic that you are particularly discussing at that point of time, you will be the smartest person in the room, but you shouldn't be apologetic about it. The reason, the moment you're apologetic about it, you try to think that, okay, if I say this, I might come across as being rude, I might come across as being arrogant. I think it's okay if you're perceived as being arrogant as long as you have proper content to back it. Right? If you perceive as arrogant and stupid, then there's a problem. So that's the only thing. I think the other thing I learned was don't ever associate your and other people's years of experience and just age, pure age as directly associated to knowledge. Depending on, and it's also not general and universal, right? Like for example, just because I'm 15 years experience doesn't mean that I'm smart at everything. There are certain areas. Rounded it to 15. All right, 18 years. I think in terms of being picky and choosy, I mean, being open to having someone young, correct you, I think it's a very good quality to have. Also, as a young person, it's also builds a lot of confidence to be able to stand up and say that, hey, look, I think you're wrong over here because I feel this way, or even if you're right or wrong, doesn't matter. Just the fact that this is something that I feel is the right thing to do is very, very important, and I do really hope that more companies encourage that. We definitely believe that in CoffeeBeans we've always encouraged that, and that builds a level of confidence and character that will not leave you. Right? Start this very early on, and it sticks with you. And as long as you know something is right and you have proper data backing it, I think you should go for it. Do or say whatever you think is right, but whatever you feel is right is very important. And very worried about what people might think. Not just worried about people, but about the outcome of something and then how that would be perceived by people. A lot of my decisions were based on how a certain group of people might react to it. It could be my colleagues, it could be my team members, it could be the clients. The problem with that was that it added an extra layer of resistance to any kind of a decision-making process. Because now I have to analyze a lot of scenarios. I have to analyze scenarios against a lot of people and figure out what the public perception would be and everything else. The problem with that was while it seems like at a high level, you might think that there's nothing wrong in that. It's good to know how people react to it. it's almost impossible to speculate and be right all the time, or even half of the time, right? In spite of doing all of this, you might end up anyway being wrong about it, right? Because people are irrational. So it's difficult to, rationally predict somebody's behavior, right? So there's no, at some point in time I realized that, it was one of the reasons I was also being very complacent. It was good enough to know that I don't know how they're going to react, I'm going to do more analysis, what's called as analysis paralysis. You do so much of analysis that you don't even move ahead. So the certain amount of my complacency came in from that. And I had to actively and consciously change that. And the way I changed it was being the opposite of it, right? To a certain extent, at some point, for some years in my life, at least, I have to stop thinking about anyone else and just say, okay, let's see how this pans out. I'll take a decision on this thing only based on what I feel, right? And that helped. And some lessons I learned is that is, it's probably a little bit more easier to create a favorable opinion about, or convince people of what you're trying to do, as long as you know what you're doing is right, than trying to figure out if that's going to pan out well or not. You actually control the narrative if you're sure and if you're right about what you're doing, right? So that's easier than just trying to figure out, अगर मैं ऐसा करूँगा तो will they be happy? If I do this, will they be happier? It's too much of speculation. So that was a very important lesson, and it's actually worked pretty well for me. I think in terms of a general ground level feeling, as long as the intent is right, as long as you're at least doing the basic things right, it's easier to do something, make a mistake, and say, "Fuck, we screwed it up. Sorry, shit, we screwed it up. Cut that." And then ask for forgiveness and saying, is it okay for me to do that? All right, cool. And then another thing. One of the lessons that I learned was this also comes from a little bit of a book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. A little bit of it from Tipping Point as well. I don't know if you guys have read it. Both books are amazing. I would highly recommend them. Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow talks about how some of our decisions are actually not as rash as we think. Impulsive decisions are not necessarily wrong, because impulsive decisions are decisions that have happened in the back of a collective knowledge about yourself and the environment, right? So, in a lot of times when you're actually getting a gut feel about something, that actually considers a lot of subconscious parameters. One of which is also how people would react to it. It's just that you have enough examples to know that without having to analyze that. So, when I started digging deeper into this, I realized that a lot of gut feeling was gut feeling because it had considered a lot of parameters, including how people might react and all that. So you're already covered that, so don't overthink it. And the last one is a little thing. I put mango people there in the sense of Aam Aadmi, the common man. Sometimes I really like R.K. Lakshman's common man theme, right? It looks at the world in a very interesting way, because sometimes it's important to think of it from a common man's perspective and say that maybe people are not going to judge you so much for this. Maybe people don't give so much shit about you as much as you think, right? So just go with it. It's a common person. The reaction will be normal, and just go with it. And then you'll handle the one or two difficult people who come your way. So that's fine. Personally feel I've not made enough of it. Again, going by my own fundamental philosophy that you want to make more mistakes, focus more on your mistakes, and that's the only way to improve. I think you should be in a position to take a few more risks in it. I think the best lessons that you learn are from the mistakes you make, because the greater the mistake, the more deeper the wound, and the more time it takes for you to forget it. And what it means is what caused that wound. So I truly believe in that, and more than reading a book or learning about some major management principle, philosophy, or coding practice, just do it. And if you screw it up, if you fudge it up big time, then you have a bigger learning from there. So I guess lessons that I've learned, right? It's okay to make a mistake once. What is that thing? Once you fool me, shame on you. Shame on me. No, yeah. And twice you fool me, shame on me. You can't make the same mistake twice. You can't let people push you around for the same thing multiple times. So the point is, learn from your mistakes, right? It's very important to make sure that every mistake is a proper learning. That's why, at least personally, whenever I spend a lot of time with some of my mentees, just people generally I work with, I pick on a mistake and I spend some time on that. And it's annoying sometimes, I know, but the reason why I spend time is because there's always a learning to be had from that. I don't fret too much on what it costs from a time and money perspective, but it's worthwhile if you just make sure that it never happens again. And which is the second lesson. If you're repeating your mistakes, you have to learn something from it. But if you're repeating, that means you're not learning from it, right? So the idea behind make mistakes early, what is that? Fail often. What does Steve saying?
Make mistakes, don't repeat.
Make mistakes don't repeat, or fail early, or fail faster, fail often, is to make sure that the faster you fail, the earlier the learning comes, right? And that's the philosophy behind it. So make mistakes more often enough, learn from them, never repeat mistakes. That's been the biggest learnings from my mistakes of my life, my mistakes from my professional life. And taking risks early is often better than taking it very early, very late in the game. But it's never too late to take a risk also. So it's better to take that risk than never do it, but also do it early enough. You see what I'm doing there?
Yeah.
Confusing.
Confusing
If you can't convince,
Yeah.
confuse.
Yeah.
Okay.